many small nations that fight among themselves constantly. Yethril explained with amusement in his voice. They cannot even unite their own planet. So they will certainly fall apart when faced with the power of the Empire. Kethver clicked his mandibles together in what passed for laughter among his species, and the sound echoed across the bridge where dozens of officers worked at their stations. A fractured species fighting itself while we arrive to take everything they have. This conquest will be finished in perhaps 3 rotations of their planet. The Grand Admiral had conquered 11 worlds himself during his 300 years of service to the Empire. And each time the pattern was the same, as the primitive species would panic and beg for mercy before being crushed under the weight of Veldrathi military power. What Kethver did not know, and what his probes had completely failed to detect, was that humanity had been watching the Veldrathi Empire for a very long time. And deep beneath the desert, in a place called Nevada, in a facility that existed on no official map, a young woman named Lucy Brennan pulled off her headphones and turned to face her supervisor. "Sir, the alien fleet just came out of faster than light travel," she reported in a calm voice that did not match the racing of her heart. "I am counting 1,200 vessels, and they are holding position near Jupiter right now." Colonel Sam Hartley set down his coffee cup on his desk and looked at the young analyst with steady eyes that had seen many impossible things during his 30 years in this secret program. "How long until they can reach Earth orbit?" "At their current speed, approximately 6 hours." Lucy answered while checking her calculations one more time to make sure she was correct. "That gives us enough time," Hartley said as he stood up from his chair and straightened his uniform. "Wake up the President immediately and tell Commander Williams to activate Protocol Prometheus." Lucy picked up a secure phone and began making calls while Hartley walked to a large screen on the wall that showed the position of every alien ship in the solar system. And he allowed himself a small smile because this was the moment they had been preparing for since before he was even born in the city of Washington. President Daniel Reyes was already awake when the call came to his private phone, because he had been unable to sleep with a strange feeling that something important was about to happen. And when his chief of staff told him what the sensors had detected, he felt a cold chill run down his spine. He had been briefed on the possibility of alien contact many years ago, when he was just a young senator on the Intelligence Committee, and the classified files he had read seemed like pure science fiction at the time. But now everything in those files was becoming terrifyingly real. "Get me General Catherine Walsh at Space Command," he said to his chief of staff as he quickly got dressed. "And prepare the emergency broadcast system because the people of Earth need to know what is happening." General Walsh was a woman in her early 60s with gray hair and a calm demeanor that never seemed to change, no matter what crisis she faced. And when she received the call from the president, she was already in the command center reviewing the defense plans one more time. "Mr. President, the alien fleet matches the profile we have been expecting," she reported through the secure video link. "Their technology is advanced, but not beyond what we have prepared for. And I believe Protocol Prometheus will be effective against them." "You believe?" the president asked with concern in his voice. "Catherine, I need more than belief right now. Sir, we have spent 70 years preparing for this exact situation," Walsh replied with confidence. "Every weapon system has been tested, every defensive satellite is in position, and every crew member knows exactly what to do. So when I say I believe we are ready, I mean that I am as certain as anyone can be about anything." The president nodded slowly and made his decision. "Then you have full authorization to defend Earth by whatever means necessary. And may God help us all if we are wrong about this. In hidden bunkers around the world, in secret installations buried under mountains and oceans, ancient systems that had been sleeping for decades began to wake up as the activation code spread through secure networks. and satellites that looked like ordinary space junk oriented themselves toward the approaching alien fleet. The weapons these satellites carried did not officially exist, and the technology inside them came from sources that no government had ever publicly acknowledged. Because the first crashed alien vessel had been recovered in 1947, and since that day, humanity had been working in complete secrecy to prepare for the arrival of whoever had built it by 1962. The scientists had figured out faster than light communication, and by 1985, they had created directed energy weapons that could cut through any known material, and by 2003, they had developed shields that could withstand a nuclear explosion at point-blank range. The public knew nothing about any of this, because the governments of the world had agreed that such technology was far too dangerous to reveal. But they had also agreed on something else that was even more important. Because if an alien threat ever came to Earth, humanity would be ready to fight back with everything they had. Colonel Hartley watched the countdown timer on his screen as Protocol Prometheus completed its activation sequence. And he thought about his grandfather, who had been one of the first scientists to work on the crashed alien ship, and his father, who had helped develop the weapons they were about to use. All systems are online and ready, Lucy reported from her station. Targeting computers are tracking every enemy vessel, and we are just waiting for the order to fire. Not yet, Hartley said quietly. We give them a chance to leave peacefully first, because that is what separates us from them. The Veldrathi had no idea that the primitive species they planned to conquer had been preparing for this moment for 3 generations. And they had no idea that the blue planet they saw as an easy target was actually the most heavily defended world in the entire galaxy. Grand Admiral Kethver ordered his fleet to begin moving toward Earth, completely unaware that he was leading his ships into a trap that would change the course of galactic history forever. Grand Admiral Kethver sat in his command chair on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion and composed his ultimatum to the humans with the practiced ease of a Piyostavatua conqueror who had delivered such messages to many primitive species before, and his communications officer transmitted the message in multiple formats so that even the most basic technology could decode it. Inhabitants of the 3rd planet, you are now subjects of the Veldrathi Empire, his recorded message announced across all frequencies. Surrender your world peacefully, and you will be permitted to serve us as workers and slaves. But if you resist our rule, you will be completely exterminated, and you have 1 rotation of your planet to make your decision. Kethver leaned back in his chair with satisfaction because he knew exactly how this would unfold. As the usual response from primitive species was panic and fear, followed by desperate attempts to negotiate some kind of mercy, followed by complete submission to the power of the Empire. Sometimes a foolish species would try to mount some kind of brief resistance, which the Veldrathi would crush quickly and brutally as an example to others. But either way, the final outcome was always inevitable, because no one could stand against the might of the Veldrathi military. The response from Earth came in under 1 hour, which was much faster than Kethver had expected. And it was definitely not the message of surrender he had been waiting for. A human female appeared on his view screen with graying hair pulled back in a tight style, and a calm expression on her face that seemed almost bored. And she wore a military uniform covered with ribbons and symbols that meant nothing to the Grand Admiral. This is General Catherine Walsh of United Earth Defense Command. The human said in a steady voice that showed no fear at all. We have received your transmission and analyzed its contents carefully, and I am authorized by the people of Earth to make the following counteroffer to you. Kethver leaned forward with interest because he had never heard a primitive species speak with such confidence before an invasion. Leave this solar system immediately, and we will permit your fleet to depart without any damage. General Walsh continued, but if you remain in our territory or attempt any hostile action against our planet, your entire fleet will be destroyed completely, and you have 1 hour to make your decision and comply with our demands. The bridge of the Eternal Dominion went completely silent for several seconds as every officer stared at the view screen in total disbelief. And then Kethver began to laugh with a harsh clicking sound that echoed through the massive chambers. Officers joined in the laughter as the tension broke, with some of them nearly falling from their stations because they found the human ultimatum so incredibly funny. And Fleet Commander Yethrol had to hold onto a console to keep himself standing. 1 hour, Kethver repeated when he had finally composed himself enough to speak. The primitive female thinks she can threaten the Veldrothi Empire with her tiny planet and her crude weapons. And this is perhaps the most delightful thing I have heard in 300 years of conquest. He turned to Yethrol, who was still trying to control his amusement. Prepare the invasion fleet immediately, and tell all commanders that we will teach these humans the true cost of defiance against our empire. General Walsh watched the transmission end from her position in the underground command center, and she noticed that the aliens had been laughing at her warning. And a slight smile crossed her face as she turned to her aide. Captain Peter Gomez was a young officer who had been assigned to Space Command only 2 years ago. But he had proven himself to be intelligent and reliable, and he stood beside the general with a tablet computer in his hands. They laughed at us, Walsh observed in a tone that suggested she was not surprised at all. Yes, ma'am. They did, Gomez replied with his own small smile, but they always laugh at first. According to the historical projections we studied, Walsh nodded and picked up a red phone that connected directly to the most classified facility on Earth. This is Prometheus Command speaking. Authorization code Omega 77. And I am ordering you to begin the full activation sequence immediately, across the entire planet Earth. In hidden bunkers that have been built during the Cold War, and then converted for a much more important purpose. And in secret installations carved into mountains in countries that were supposedly enemies of each other, and in underwater bases that rested on the ocean floor where no one would ever think to look. Ancient systems hummed to life as they received the activation command satellites that had been floating in orbit for decades while pretending to be dead space junk suddenly oriented themselves toward the approaching alien fleet. And their targeting systems began calculating firing solutions for every single enemy vessel. Weapons that no human government had officially acknowledged possessing began their warm-up procedures, as directed energy projectors charged their capacitors and kinetic launchers loaded their ammunition and shield generators powered up to full strength. Lucy Brennan watched her screens in the Nevada facility as status reports came in from defense installations around the world, and each one showed green lights indicating that everything was ready for the battle that was about to begin. All orbital platforms are online and tracking targets, she reported to Colonel Hartley, who stood behind her with his arms crossed over his chest. Ground-based installations are at full power and ready to fire, and the fleet is standing by in the asteroid belt waiting for orders. The fleet, Hartley repeated quietly, because even after all these years, it still amazed him that humanity had secretly built warships capable of traveling between stars. How many ships do we have in position? 47 combat vessels of various sizes, Lucy answered while checking her data, plus 12 support ships and the carrier Freedom's Call with its full complement of fighters. Hartley nodded slowly because 60 ships seemed like a tiny force compared to the 1,200 vessels in the alien fleet. But he knew that raw numbers did not tell the whole story when one side had technology that was generations beyond the other. Has the president finished his broadcast? He asked. Yes, sir. The entire world now knows that aliens are real and that they are coming to invade us," Lucy replied. "The reaction is about what we expected, with some panic and some denial. But most people seem to be taking it better than the psychologists predicted on the Eternal Dominion." Grand Admiral Kethver was giving final orders to his fleet commanders as 300 dropships prepared to launch from the bellies of the transport vessels, and 12 massive dreadnoughts powered up their main weapons to begin orbital bombardment of the planet below. "We will strike 3 major population centers simultaneously," Kethver explained to his commanders through the fleet communication network. "The cities called New York and London and Tokyo will be our first targets. And once the humans see their greatest cities burning, they will lose all will to resist us." "What about the female who threatened us?" Fleet Commander Yethral asked. "Should we try to locate her command center and destroy it first?" "Let her watch her world burn," Kethver replied with cruel amusement. "It will be fitting punishment for her arrogance in thinking she could challenge the Empire." The alien dropships launched in perfect formation and began their descent toward the blue planet below, while the dreadnoughts moved into bombardment position and prepared to unleash destruction on a scale the humans had never imagined in the underground command center. General Walsh watched the enemy movements on her tactical display and waited for the perfect moment to give the order that would change everything. "All stations report ready," Captain Gomez announced. "We are just waiting for your command, General." Walsh took a deep breath and spoke the words that humanity had been waiting 70 years to hear. "All stations, you are authorized to engage the enemy. And may God have mercy on their souls, because we certainly will not." The first shot of the war for Earth was about to be fired, and the Veldrathi Empire had absolutely no idea what was coming for them. The Veldrathi invasion began exactly on schedule as 300 dropships descended through the darkness of space toward the blue planet below, and Admiral Kethver watched from his command chair with the satisfaction of a conqueror who had done this many times before and always achieved complete victory. "Launch all atmospheric assault craft," he commanded in a booming voice that carried across the bridge. "Begin orbital bombardment of all military installations that our scans have detected. And I want this primitive world completely pacified within 2 rotations." The 12 massive dreadnoughts moved into position above the major continents and powered up their main weapons, as glowing energy built up in their forward cannons and prepared to rain destruction down on the helpless cities below. The Veldrathi had done this countless times to countless worlds, and they expected nothing different from this small blue planet with its divided nations and primitive technology. And every officer on every ship felt completely confident that victory was already assured. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came when the lead dropship simply vanished from existence. As one moment it was descending toward the surface, and the next moment it was nothing but an expanding cloud of superheated debris spreading across the upper atmosphere. "What happened to that vessel?" demanded the officer commanding the dropship formation. But before anyone could answer, another dropship disappeared in the same way, and then a dozen more were destroyed in rapid succession on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion. Alarms began screaming as the tactical display showed dropship after dropship being eliminated by unknown weapons fire. And Kethver jumped to his feet with shock spreading across his alien features. "What is happening down there?" he shouted at his tactical officer, who was frantically trying to analyze the incoming data. "Unknown weapons fire from the planetary surface." "Grand Admiral," the officer replied with a trembling voice. "The weapons appear to be some form of concentrated energy beam that our sensors cannot properly identify, and our shields are having absolutely no effect against them." Kethver stared at the tactical display as more and more of his dropships were destroyed, each one carrying 500 soldiers who would never set foot on the planet they had come to conquer. And in less than 3 minutes, all 300 dropships had been completely eliminated. "That is impossible," he whispered. "No primitive species could possess such weapons." Deep beneath the mountains of Nevada, Lucy Brennan watched her display screens with quiet satisfaction. As the orbital defense grid performed exactly as it had been designed to do after decades of secret development and testing, each hidden installation around the Z-end world housed a quantum-linked targeting system that could track objects moving at incredible speeds, and the directed energy weapons they controlled were powerful enough to cut through Veldrathi shields like a hot knife through soft butter. "All enemy dropships have been destroyed," she reported to Colonel Hartley, who stood behind her with his arms folded across his chest. Total time from first engagement to complete elimination was 2 minutes and 47 seconds. "Better than the simulations predicted," Hartley replied with grim satisfaction. "Now tell all stations to move to Phase 2 and engage the capital ships." The message went out across the secure network to every hidden weapon installation on Earth and in orbit, and thousands of targeting computers locked onto the massive Veldrathi warships that hung in space above the planet. General Walsh spoke into her communicator from the main command center. "All stations, you are authorized to engage enemy capital ships, and do not stop firing until every hostile vessel has been neutralized." The Eternal Dominion shuddered violently as something struck it with impossible force, and Grand Admiral Kethfer was thrown from his command chair as explosions rippled through the massive vessel and flames erupted from damaged systems. "Damage report immediately," he screamed as he pulled himself back to his feet. "Main shields are down to 12% and falling." His damage control officer reported in a voice filled with terror. "We have hull breaches on 17 different decks, and the Righteous Fury and Infinite Conquest have both been completely destroyed." Kethfer stared at the tactical display in absolute horror as he watched his fleet being systematically annihilated by weapons that should not exist, and ships that had conquered entire civilizations were being reduced to burning wreckage by a species that supposedly could not even travel between stars. "How is this possible?" he whispered as another dreadnought exploded on his display. "How can these primitives possess such power?" The answer came from his communications officer, who looked up from his station with a face that had gone completely pale. "Grand Admiral, we are receiving another transmission from the planet's surface." General Walsh appeared on the view screen again with the same calm expression she had worn before, and behind her, the tactical displays showed the destruction of the Veldrathi fleet in real time. "You were warned," she said simply. "Leave this solar system now, and we will allow your surviving vessels to retreat in peace. But if you continue your attack, not one of your ships will escape this system alive." On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Kethfer felt something he had never experienced in 300 years of military service. Something that was completely foreign to a species that had conquered 17 star systems without ever tasting defeat. And that feeling was pure, overwhelming fear. His pride and his training screamed at him to continue fighting because the Veldrathi Empire never retreated and never surrendered. But as he watched another dreadnought explode on his tactical display and felt his own ship shudder from more impacts, his survival instinct began to overpower everything else. "Grand Admiral, what are your orders?" Yethril asked desperately as more damage reports flooded in from across the fleet. Kethfer looked at the numbers on his display and saw that he had already lost more than half of his ships in less than 10 minutes of fighting, and the enemy weapons showed no sign of slowing down or running out of power in the asteroid belt beyond the orbit of Mars. Captain Nina Delgado stood on the bridge of the human destroyer, relentless, and watched the battle unfold on her tactical display, as her ship and 46 others waited in hiding for the order to join the fight. "The orbital platforms are tearing them apart," our first officer observed with satisfaction. "I do not think we will even be needed today. Do not underestimate a cornered enemy." Delgado replied. They may be losing, but they still have hundreds of ships. And desperate creatures often do desperate things. Her communication officer looked up from his station. Captain, we are receiving orders from command, and they want us to move in and finish off the survivors. Delgado nodded and gripped the arms of her chair as she gave the order. She had been training for her entire career. All ships, engage engines and prepare for combat. Because today we show the galaxy what humanity can do. The human fleet emerged from hiding and accelerated toward the battered Veldrathi formation. Their sleek and deadly vessels, moving in perfect coordination as they closed the distance to their wounded prey on the Eternal Dominion. The sensor officer stared at his screens in disbelief. Grand Admiral, I am detecting new contacts emerging from the asteroid field, and they appear to be warships of human design. How many? Kepfer demanded. Approximately 60 vessels of various sizes, the officer replied. And they are approaching at speeds that should be impossible for any civilization at their level of development. Kepfer finally understood the terrible truth that his arrogance had blinded him to. Because the humans had not been primitive at all, and they had been hiding their true capabilities while waiting for exactly this moment. All ships, retreat immediately, he ordered in a voice that cracked with desperation. Jump to faster than light travel and escape this system at once. But for most of his fleet, the order came far too late, because the human weapons had already crippled their engines and destroyed their jump drives. And the proud warships of the Veldrathi Empire could only drift helplessly as the human fleet closed in for the kill. The battle for Earth was almost over, and humanity had won a victory that would echo across the entire galaxy. Grand Admiral Kepfer made a decision that would have been completely unthinkable just 1 hour earlier, as he ordered a full retreat of all surviving Veldrathi vessels. But his shattered fleet was no longer capable of executing such a maneuver, because most of his ships had been too badly damaged to achieve faster than light travel of. The 1,200 warships that had arrived at Earth with such confidence and arrogance, fewer than 200 remained operational, and many of those were limping through space with their engines barely functioning and their weapons completely destroyed as the survivors tried to flee toward the edge of the solar system. Human ships appeared from hiding spots throughout the asteroid belt and began moving to intercept them, their sleek hulls gleaming in the distant sunlight as they closed in on their wounded prey, Captain Nina. Delgado stood on the bridge of the destroyer Relentless and watched the fleeing alien vessels on her tactical display, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and something close to pity for enemies who had been so thoroughly defeated. Orders coming in from command. Our first officer, Lieutenant Kevin Marsh, reported from his station. We are to disable the enemy flagship, but preserve it intact for capture. And all other vessels are to be neutralized immediately. Understood, Delgado replied in a steady voice while her hands gripped her chair arms tightly. Signal all ships to weapons free, and let us finish this. The battle, if it could even be called that anymore, lasted less than 20 minutes. As human warships moved through the broken Veldrathi fleet like wolves hunting through a scattered flock of sheep, their weapons faster and more accurate, and far more powerful than anything the aliens could deploy in defense dreadnoughts that had once been the pride of the Veldrathi Navy were torn apart by concentrated fire, their massive hulls cracking open and spilling debris and bodies into the cold vacuum of space. And cruisers that had conquered entire star systems were reduced to burning wreckage in seconds when it was finally over. Only the Eternal Dominion remained, its engines disabled by precise shots that had crippled the vessel without destroying it, and its weapons melted into useless slag by focused energy beams that had surgically targeted every turret and launcher. Boarding party led by Sergeant Jake Morrison breached the hull of the alien flagship using cutting tools that sliced through the armored plating like it was made of paper. and his team of 20 soldiers fought their way through the smoke-filled corridors toward the bridge. The Veldrathi crew tried to resist the invaders, but their personal weapons were useless against the advanced armor the humans wore, and one by one they fell until Morrison and his team reached the command center, where they found Grand Admiral Kethfer standing among the bodies of his fallen officers. The alien leader held a ceremonial blade in his clawed hand, a weapon that had been passed down through generations of his family, and his posture suggested that he intended to die fighting rather than surrender to the primitives who had destroyed his entire fleet. I am Grand Admiral Kethfer of the Veldrathi Empire, he said through his translator device, which rendered his clicking alien language into flat mechanical English. I demand to know how a primitive species could possibly possess such weapons and such technology. Morrison lowered his rifle slightly but kept it ready to fire if the alien made any sudden moves. You assumed we were primitive because we had not spread across the galaxy and conquered other worlds like you did. But you never considered that maybe we just did not want to be found. That is completely impossible. Kethfer replied with disbelief in his translated voice. No species capable of such advanced technology would choose to hide themselves and pretend to be weak, unless they knew exactly what was out there waiting for them. Morrison answered while gesturing to his team to secure the prisoner. We have been watching the galaxy for a long time, Admiral, and we learned enough about species like yours to know that we needed to be ready. Kethfer allowed the blade to fall from his hand as human soldiers moved forward to restrain him. And for the first time in his 300 years of life, he truly understood that the universe was not what he had always believed it to be, the city of Washington. President Daniel Reyes addressed the world from the Oval Office as cameras broadcast his image to every nation on Earth. And behind him, screens displayed footage of the battle that had just been won. My fellow humans, he began with a voice that carried both weariness and pride. Today we face the greatest challenge our species has ever encountered. As an alien empire attempted to conquer our world and enslave our people, and they believed that we were weak and divided and completely defenseless against their power. He paused for a moment to let his words sink in before continuing. They were wrong about us, and today they learned just how wrong they were. The footage behind him showed Veldrathi ships burning and exploding, human vessels moving in perfect formation, and the final capture of the enemy flagship by boarding parties who had trained for years for exactly this mission. For decades, the governments of Earth have been preparing for this day in complete secrecy, the president explained. We knew that hostile forces existed among the stars, and we made a difficult choice to hide our true capabilities while developing the weapons and ships that would be needed to defend our home. He looked directly into the camera with determination in his eyes. Today, that preparation saved our entire civilization from extinction or slavery. And I want to thank the brave men and women who fought to protect us, as well as the scientists and engineers who built the tools they used around the world. People watched the broadcast in stunned silence as they tried to process everything they were hearing, because the reality of extraterrestrial life and interstellar war and secret technologies was almost too much for ordinary minds to handle. But mixed with the shock and confusion was something else, something that had been rare in the divided politics and arguments of recent years. And that something was a feeling of unity and shared purpose. Humanity had faced extinction together and had survived together. And many people realized that the petty differences that had seemed so important yesterday now seemed completely meaningless in the face of what they had just witnessed in the secure bunker beneath the mountains of Nevada. Colonel Sam Hartley finally allowed himself to sit down and rest after the longest day of his life, as Lucy Brennan brought him a fresh cup of coffee and sat beside him. We did it, she said quietly. We actually did it. This time, Hartley replied while taking a long drink from his cup. But the Admiral told us during his interrogation that the Veldrathi Empire has 47 inhabited worlds and military forces that make this fleet look like a scouting party. Lucy nodded slowly because she had read the same intelligence reports. So this is not over? Not by a long shot, Hartley confirmed. When word of this defeat reaches their homeworld, they will send a larger fleet to avenge their losses. Maybe 10 times larger or 100 times larger. Because empires like theirs cannot allow a defeat like this to go unanswered. Then we need to be ready for them when they come back. Hartley smiled grimly and set down his coffee cup. That is exactly what I was thinking, and this time we will not be fighting alone. Because the whole world knows the truth now, and humanity will face whatever comes next as a united species. The sun was setting over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, and somewhere far above the atmosphere, human warships patrolled the space around Earth, while recovery teams collected the wreckage of Veldrathi vessels for study. The invasion had failed completely, and the galaxy would soon learn that Earth was not the easy target it appeared to be. But everyone who understood the situation knew that the real war had not even started yet. 3 months had passed since the Battle of Sol, as historians had already begun calling the conflict that changed everything humanity knew about the universe. And Grand Admiral Kethvar now sat in a sterile interrogation room beneath the mountains of Colorado, where he had been held since his capture. Across the table from him sat Dr. Carol Hutton, a woman in her 50s who had spent 20 years studying alien languages and cultures. While preparing for a conversation she had never truly believed would actually happen. The Veldrathi Empire spans 47 inhabited worlds across this region of the galaxy. Kethvar explained through his translator device, his voice carrying a tone of resignation that would have been unthinkable before his defeat. When word of this disaster reaches the homeworld, they will send a much larger fleet to punish your species. Carol nodded while recording every word on her tablet. How much larger do you estimate this response fleet will be? 10 times the size of mine at minimum. Perhaps even 100 times if the High Council decides to make an example of your world, Kethvar replied. The Empire does not accept failure and cannot allow a primitive species to humiliate them without consequences. We anticipated that response, Carol said calmly. How long do you estimate we have before they can mount such an assault? Perhaps 5 of your Earth years, perhaps less if they redirect ships from other conquests, the alien answered. The resources of the Empire are vast, and they will not stop until your world is either conquered or completely destroyed. Carol made a note on her tablet and looked up at the defeated admiral. Thank you for your honesty, and I want you to know that your cooperation will be noted in my reports to the Council in the city of Geneva. The newly formed United Earth Council held its first official session in a great hall that had been hastily converted for this historic purpose. As delegates from every nation on the planet sat together for the first time in human history, Ambassador Helen Price of the former United States stood at the central podium and addressed the assembly with a voice that carried both determination and hope. We have been given a rare gift, she said to the gathered delegates, a warning about the dangers that exist among the stars, and an opportunity to unite our species before it is too late. She paused to look around the room at faces that represented every culture and nation on Earth. The attack we survived 3 months ago united humanity in a way that nothing else could have achieved. But we must recognize that unity forged in crisis is fragile and will not last unless we work to make it permanent. The debates that followed were fierce and sometimes bitter, as old rivalries and suspicions that had divided nations for centuries did not disappear overnight. But in the end, the Council agreed on 3 fundamental principles that would guide humanity into the future. First, They would create a unified planetary defense force that combined the military resources of every nation into a single command structure. Because the days of fighting among themselves while enemies waited in the darkness were over. Second, they would share all advanced technology among all nations equally, so that no single country could dominate the others, and the benefits of human innovation would lift everyone together. Third, they would establish permanent human presence throughout the solar system, building colonies and outposts that would serve as the first steps toward becoming a truly spacefaring civilization. Dr. Robert Liu, the chief scientist at the Nevada Research Facility, oversaw the first public demonstration of human anti-gravity technology on a bright morning in the California desert. As millions of people around the world watched through their screens, a vessel the size of a small office building rose silently from the launch pad without any visible means of propulsion, hovered motionless for 30 seconds while cameras captured the historic moment, and then accelerated toward orbit faster than any rocket ever built by human hands. This is just the beginning of what we can do, Liu told the reporters who gathered around him after the demonstration. The technology we have developed over the past 70 years will transform every aspect of human civilization, from energy production to transportation to medicine to agriculture. And the stars are no longer beyond our reach, but not everyone was celebrating the new era of peace and progress. Because in a secure bunker somewhere beneath the Pacific Ocean, General Catherine Walsh met with the commanders of humanity's secret fleet to discuss what came next. The Veldrathi will return, she said while standing before a massive display, showing the known regions of alien space. And when they do, they will not underestimate us the way Kethver did. So we need to be ready for a war that could last generations. Admiral Victor Reeves, the commander of the first interstellar fleet, stepped forward and pulled up a star chart that showed the locations of known Veldrathi outposts. Our long-range scouts have identified their nearest military base, approximately 40 light-years from Earth, he reported while pointing to a red marker on the display. I recommend that we take the fight to them before they have time to organize a proper invasion force. Walsh considered this suggestion for a long moment. You are proposing that we become the aggressors. I am proposing that we survive, Reeves replied firmly. The power of the Veldrathi Empire comes from fear, because every species they have conquered believed that resistance was useless and that defeat was inevitable. But we have proven that belief wrong. He met the general's eyes with determination. If we strike now while they are still confused and demoralized by their loss, we might be able to force a stalemate or even push them to negotiate. But if we wait for them to come to us, we will be fighting on their terms with their numbers. The decision was not Walsh's alone to make, but she knew exactly what she would recommend to the United Earth Council when they asked for her military assessment 1 year later. The first human warships crossed the boundary of the solar system and activated their faster-than-light drives, vanishing into the cosmic darkness with a flash of exotic energy that marked the beginning of a new chapter. In human history, the ships carried weapons that could shatter planets and shields that could withstand the fury of dying stars. But more importantly, they carried a message to every species in the galaxy. Earth was no longer hiding, and humanity would never be prey again in the years that followed. The name of humanity spread across the Orion Arm like wildfire, as some species heard the stories of the Veldrathi defeat and trembled with fear, while others saw an opportunity to ally themselves with a rising power that might finally challenge the Empire's dominance. The Veldrathi themselves, faced with an enemy they could not defeat through overwhelming force and could not intimidate through threats, eventually agreed to a treaty that recognized human sovereignty over a growing sphere of space that expanded with each passing decade. Lucy Brennan, now the Director of Interstellar Intelligence, stood on an observation deck overlooking the construction of humanity's first colony outside the solar system. As the green and blue world below reminded her of home, even though its 2 moons and brilliant rings made it unmistakably alien. "We came so close to losing everything," she said to her companion, a young analyst named Marcus Powell, who reminded her of herself 30 years ago. "But we survived," he replied while watching construction drones assemble the framework of a new city on the planet below. "We are here because the people who came before us made hard choices and took great risks. This time, we survived," Lucy corrected him gently. "But there is always another threat waiting out there. Another empire or another danger that we have not discovered yet. Because the universe does not care about us, and it never will." Marcus turned to look at her with curiosity. "Then, what do we do?" Lucy smiled for the first time in months as she watched a human ship rise from the colony below and climb toward the stars. "We keep proving ourselves over and over again, until the whole galaxy knows that humanity is not a species to be conquered or enslaved or destroyed." The stars wheeled silently overhead in their eternal dance, vast and cold and completely indifferent to the small creatures who had begun to walk among them. But those small creatures carried with them something that the universe had never seen. Before they carried hope and determination and an absolute refusal to surrender. And those qualities had already changed the course of galactic history once the invasion had failed completely, and the Empire had been humbled. And the story of humanity among the stars had only just begun the end.